To talk about what appears to be an ever-changing landscape in Iraq, we're joined by Thomas Lynch. He's a distinguished fellow at the National Defense University in Washington. The New York Times reporting that the U.S. president trying to stitch together a coalition, which may include Australia and Britain in terms of more airstrikes and perhaps a creep into Syria. How do you see this playing out and how important is it?
Yeah, Mike, good to be with you again and to talk about this based on my own research, not about my position as a U.S. government employee at the National Defense University. Yeah, I think we're at an evolutionary state here. I think the last couple of weeks, the United States, with the invitation, finally, of the government of Iraq, felt compelled to take limited actions to safeguard personnel and lives in Iraq, to help, as an example, with the dam near Mosul, which clearly was a threat if it would have been blown up and unleashed carnage in other parts of the country, but a very limited and invited activity. In Syria, this will be different, because Syria is a contested space that still is under the control of the Assad government, who the United States and the countries you just mentioned, as well as most of its Arab neighbors, have said can no longer stand and is an enemy against. But given ISIS's strength and what it's doing in the country, I think what the government of the United States is looking at right now is how to provide some type of limited activity, but doing it with coalition partners. And here I think it's important, coalition partners like the UK and like Australia, where we share reciprocal intelligence protocols that are complete. That is, we share everything with those governments, unlike a number of our other partners where we don't share as much completely. And I might add, governments that are very concerned also about their foreign citizens who are now known to be fighting within the most extreme groups like ISIS.
It almost seems like a double-pronged approach, though, because General Martin Dempsey also talking about weaving together another coalition of partners in the region around Iraq. Who should be in that coalition, and who are the key players, do you think?
Right. Well, I really think that all this activity is going on at the same time. I mean, as you and I talked about, I think on previous occasions, the absolute xenophobia and violence of an ISIS group, or the ultimate and Salafi jihadi groups, they breed their own antibodies, and they breed them very, very rapidly. And we're seeing that happen now within Iraq, to a lesser extent in Syria, but also with countries surrounding the area, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman. I'm tracking them having their own meetings right now in private about how to deal with this onslaught, how to, if anything, seed antibodies within Syria and Iraq that are other Sunni groups, maybe militants, but not quite so militant or virulent as ISIS. So that's going on. Now, the U.S. has to be careful and cautious about approaching this type of an alliance and a structure, but I think that's what General Dempsey is getting at, because this group is going to be defeated primarily by a anti-ISIS coalition that is Muslim and that is Sunni, and not that is led by outsiders that can be branded as infidels or crusading invaders. We have a limited ability to act in this area without creating our own response. And I think we have to be cautious and careful of that. And it's these other regional states that play into the dimension of the ultimate defeat.
But one has to imagine that at some point, one of these actors in that region has to be, or perhaps more than one, has to be helping ISIS either directly or indirectly. Is there a way for the West to put pressure on them to stop?
Well, I think you're right. And I would argue that there have really been two players that have helped facilitate ISIS from a group that even 15 months ago was not being tracked. I mean, I was just looking today at some maps that were being utilized by our Defense Department intelligence agencies, and ISIS wasn't even on it, okay? It metastasized that quickly, but it metastasized largely around a group of foreign fighters, and with two dimensions. First, the assistance and the facilitation of Sunni tribesmen in western Iraq, whose basic grievance was with the Maliki government in Baghdad. You can argue whether it was wise or foolish. I would argue the latter. Decided to do a deal with these violent guys to show that they couldn't just be pushed over by the Maliki government. So that's helped ISIS gain a lot of traction that it would not have otherwise gained. Second, there's been a facilitation and an assistance by the spillover of arms and assistance given to a wide array of groups inside of Syria, but that have fallen into the hands of ISIS as it's gotten stronger, as it's attacked better, and as there's been some leakage of funds coming from countries within the region. Saudis, Qataris, UAE, even some Western governments. So ISIS has been facilitated by those two things. But again, ISIS is breeding the seeds of its own destruction because it's so in public, it's so out there, and it's so in your face with the violence that the tribesmen of the Sunni Western Iraq are turning against it. We see that happening, and they just need some time to decide to totally jettison the act. And within Syria, again, groups in the region are assisting groups that are against ISIS try to build strength inside Syria. So I think buying time is what the Western states have to be about. Maybe disrupting ISIS right now to allow these natural antibodies to do what inevitably happens with a group like this, whether it be Zarqawi back in the 2000s or other virulent, violent actors. That is, everybody else kind of gangs up on them because nobody wants them as next-door neighbors.
All right, Thomas Lynch, thanks so much for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.